All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Brave Campus Webinar Wednesdays. Make sure, hey, does anyone mind saying if you can hear me in the chat? I just want to make sure all our audio is going well. We're really excited to have you back. I want to say hey to Liz and Jennifer, Sydney, Angie, everyone who's saying hi. It's great to have you guys back. I know a couple of you missed the last webinar or maybe the one before, so Lexi's going to throw some links in there so you can get back to those. But we're super thrilled to have you all here today. Today, we've got Christina Murray on. Chris, say hi.
Hey.
So she is the Director of Wellness Services at Smith College, and she is also the founder and author of Live, Laugh, Boss, which is an amazing blog. You have to check it out. When I first was introduced to Chris through Jordan and Lexi, the first thing I did was kind of, learn a little bit about her, went online, and I was in stitches laughing. She's absolutely brilliant, so you gotta make sure you check that out. I'll put the link in the chat for you guys later. So today she's going to be talking about balancing your kind of work life and your personal life. As programmers, you're kind of dedicated to your students, making sure they're always in a good place, which is fabulous, but it can be then difficult to take care of yourself. So Chris is going to give us some insight on that today. And without further ado, I think I will pass things off to her. Let me just figure my life out for a quick second. And here we go. Chris, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Callie, for that awesome introduction. And thank you all for being here. I'm just so excited to be here with you right now. Can anyone just throw into the chat really quick where you're from, just so I know who's here and where you come from and what kind of school you come from, or if you come from a different field, that's also cool. So just let me know really quick in the field. Thanks, Jennifer. So we got I'm not very good at the acronyms, but I see Virginia. I know that one. Okay. Minnesota. All right, cool. New York. Hey, I'm from New York. I'm from Yonkers, New York. Awesome. City College of Chicago, Boston. Okay, cool. So let those keep rolling in. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about myself and the work that I do and kind of how I fell into wellness. So wellness is one of those fields that I think you don't right away go into, or you don't choose to do it. It kind of chooses you. And so this entire webinar will be about how do you in your place of work find integration of work and life and balance. So I don't really like the term balance. I like the term integration because I think when you're thinking about work-life balance, it sounds like two very separate entities where you have your work and then you have your life, versus you spend 8 hours of your day at work. So really it's about integrating your life aspects into your work. So we're going to talk a lot about that and some of the mistakes that I've made along the way, which if you ever check out my blog, Live, Laugh, Boss, it's all about the tons of mistakes that I've made in my work career and how I ended up here being the Director of Wellness Services at 25 years old. So essentially, let's just take a breather. If everyone could breathe with me, I'm just super nervous. I've never done a webinar before, so just breathe with me. That's a part of wellness, being true to yourself and honest about what's going on with you and your body. All right, cool. So as many service workers are, I'm a huge empath. I feel a lot and I connect with people on a level that I think is deeper than a lot of people. I work really hard to show up very authentically as often as possible, especially with my work. So prior to working at Smith, I worked at Montefiore Hospital. And there I was a community health organizer, and my main job was connecting with people and being the liaison between the community and the hospital. So that means specifically the students and their families, and then the actual hospital themselves, and helping people get their services. And I was always very proud of giving my all, putting everything and all of myself into my work. And that was great because the students, they got a lot out of it. I got really close to the community. I was being invited to churches and mosques and just being out there and being a part of this work. However, along the way, I started to notice that I was putting more of myself into my work than anywhere else. And it also became a sense of hubris, right? So I was putting more work in than everybody else. And I cared for my students more than everybody else did. And thus, like, I kept doing more and more and putting less of myself first and more of my students first. And I essentially fell into the background of my own life. And that became really, really scary. I got really sick at one point, developed like digestive issues, chronic migraines. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, like that's the beginning signs of burnout. And so I had to step back from that job because if I didn't, I don't even know if I'd be here with you right now talking about the survivorship of it all, because I ended up having to listen to my body, right? So long story short, I like moved to Baltimore. I went to grad school and started working on health communications and learning all about how do you communicate with people, and then how do you put yourself in the forefront of communication so that you are with yourself and your body when you're communicating, that you're not in the background. And so that's what we're going to work on today. So I moved to Smith, and essentially, like, I decided when I got the job that I was going to put myself first, regardless of what was going on, what students were dying. Like, I would come first. My life was just as important as theirs. And I think it often sounds really selfish when in a service role, when you start to think about yourself, right? It's looked down upon even. So that's where we are today. So I hope that's a good enough introduction. We're going to move on to the competencies. I'd like to hit 4 competencies with you today. So number 1 is establishing boundaries with your students, with administrators, and also most importantly with yourself. And then the second competency is integrating wellness into your workday. Third, identifying and taking advantage of opportunities for advancement in your workplace. And 4 is negotiating the lifestyle that you want while you're working on campus. So great. All right. So any questions thus far about my story or anything before we move on? All right. Nothing's coming in. So something I want you guys to throw into the chat really quickly is, why do you think that your colleagues at your campus or your institution or wherever you are experience burnout? Why does that happen? Come on, let's talk, let's feel. We're all safe here. Limited staff, awesome. Really, anything else? Feeling overworked, huge. Feeling guilty, okay, because you put others before yourself. Great. One man show, that's my story. Okay. Culture encourages engagement and isn't mindful of the total hours over cost. Okay. Very good. So yeah, those are very typical reasons. So burnout is a state of emotional and mental exhaustion, essentially caused by excessive stress. So people always ask me, what's the difference between stress and burnout? So stress essentially is, there can be healthy stress where there's just like things going on in your life and your fight or flight syndrome in your body like builds up, and like there's this buildup of stress in your body. But the difference is that burnout is that accumulated stress over time if you're not relieving it, right? So just to give you a quick understanding of fight or flight. So in your body, back in the day, in the Stone Ages, if there was a lion coming after you and they're trying to eat you and you're running, right? There's a buildup of cortisol in your body that then you release through running and hopefully escaping and not getting eaten by the lion. However, now that stress is not really a physical kind of a stress, right? It's more of like I'm at work and there's a lot of things building up. I'm running a one-man show. The culture doesn't allow me to be fully engaged and also get what I need out of it. And so these accumulated stresses are staying in our body, which then allows and not being released. And so that ends up being like really unhealthy for the body, can lead to fat cells, like, and like a whole bunch of other health things, which is not the focus of this, so we're not going to go into that. But essentially, it's just this accumulation over time. And so, as you can see on the screen, there's a list of reasons why burnout can happen. And I think the ones that we're going to focus on today is this invisibility piece, not feeling valued at work, stagnancy and lack of growth opportunities, and poor work-life integration. And I highlighted and bolded the invisibility because when I was preparing for this webinar, I did a literature review, just trying to find how much information there is about burnout and staff on college campuses. And can anyone guess how much I found? Anyone out there? None, exactly. I found 0 articles about burnout and staff in college campuses. I found tons about social workers, about faculty, about the general work field. Like the United States, there's an uptick of stress and like burnout culture just in the United States, but nothing specifically about staff. And that really resonated with me because I was like, I think in general, staff are undervalued on college campuses and they're unseen and they're unheard. And then it's reflected right here in the literature, right, where you can't find anything about it. So I then reached out to like a couple colleagues of mine. I was like, okay, well, maybe there's a shortcoming in my research capabilities. Let me look out and find out. So I reached out to the director of counseling and a couple other people at Smith, and they too found nothing. Go figure. So if any of you out there are looking for research opportunities, college staff, we need some we need some work being done to help us out. All right. So moving on. Oh yeah, so the symptoms of burnout. I talked a little bit about it in my personal story, but essentially it's like a loss of motivation, disengagement from the work that you're doing, a detachment. It can lead to depression, it can lead to chronic stress, it can lead to just feelings in the body of, or like manifestations of stress in the body, headaches and stomach aches and just tensions. And like you see this kind of motion in your body where your shoulders are always like up to your ears and you're like walking around looking like a stone person, you know, because you're not releasing, you're not doing things to take care of yourself. So I realized that one of the reasons I was feeling that was less about the institution and more about myself, less about not like creating boundaries for myself in my personal life and in my work life to allow myself to thrive on the campus. And I feel that oftentimes we blame the institution for the big macro things without actually focusing on what are the steps that we can take. So throughout this entire webinar, I'm going to share with you a lot of personal stories about ways that I've overcome the me that was hindering my thriving. Okay, so let's quickly go on and talk about establishing boundaries. So I think there are 4 levels to establishing boundaries on a college campus or in any workforce or work environment. And the first one is the most important one. That's the one that I highlighted in red. So those are your basic needs. Those are eating, sleeping, and using the bathroom. Like if you are not pooping well and like going to the bathroom on a regular timely basis and you're not getting your 7 to 8 hours of sleep, honey, like you are not living, all right? So make sure that you're doing that. All right, how many of you have skipped lunch? Oh, we're gonna talk all about that, Callie. So skipping lunch. Lunch is a hardcore time for me. It is a line. So I know that can't be for everyone because a lot of times there's lunch meetings and those awful ones. You ever been to a lunch meeting where they don't actually serve you lunch? Like that's insane. Anyway, or eating at your desk. Yeah, exactly. These are a lot of things where we are not taking care of ourselves because lunchtime is an owed time to you. It's not a luxury. It's not something that like maybe I should take today. It's something that you should take every day, even if it's just taking a portion of that lunch period. If you have a lot of extra work, you should take a break at lunch every single day, and that should be a hard line for you. For myself, I've blocked out in my calendar on days that are lunch days. I am not going to do any work during that time. It doesn't matter what student is in crisis, it doesn't matter what meeting is coming up. Like, I'm not going to that meeting. Like, it's my lunch break that day. And some days you can't do that because of an emergency or whatever. But I think that's really important. And just recognizing the habits that you build are ones that will stay with you forever, right? So the next level is your personal work boundaries. So personal work boundaries really come down to acknowledging like habits that you form and why you form them and what you can do to change them, right? So and what are some of the things that like have carried on since like undergrad and grad school, like time management issues, procrastination issues. Who got those? Hey, I do. But recognizing that those are some of the issues that you hold, and like figuring out how you change that for yourself. So I suggest to my students and to other staff members to use like apps. So one I really, really like is the Pomodoro app, where it schedules out your time for you. It gives you like 30-minute, 40-minute work schedule times. Work segments, and then 5-minute breaks, because your brain needs time to heal. And Nancy mentioned that she does meditation during her lunch break. Huge. Exactly. Like that'll make a big difference. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that meditation and mindfulness in a little while. But just using those breaks to even just breathe, like if you're not comfortable with mindfulness or meditation, you haven't done it before, like just taking that time to breathe and setting your work aside, like stepping away from your computer. The next boundary is email. Like when are you checking email? Like email can be a sense of frustration for people, because you look at your email every morning and there's like 100 new emails from everybody and their mom, from administration to, students and this and that, right? But finding a way to limit your intake of email. So I only check my email half an hour in the morning and half an hour before I leave for work, and then maybe sporadically throughout the day, if I know that important things are happening. And I'll really only look at the emails from people that I know need to hear from me right away. Another big boundary that I made for myself is personal days, right? So I told you that I had an issue with feeling that like I had this kind of like a savior complex, sort of, that if I didn't work, that children were gonna die. And essentially, that's not all my fault, because I had a supervisor that on my first day of work told my cohort that if we made mistakes or didn't do our work properly, that little babies would die. So essentially, that was like put on me. But from then, I learned how important it is to take your vacation and your personal days and make that a very big boundary. So now on, from early in the year, before the school year even starts, I put my personal days into my calendar. I get 3 personal dates, and I schedule 2 of them, knowing exactly when my usual stress periods are during campus programming timeline. And then I leave the extra one for an emergency or if I just need that day. But I schedule them in from way ahead of time, and that has been very helpful. Another issue is wanting to listen to all the students all the time. And I hope a lot of you are better than me and don't do that. But I had to find a limit for myself, a personal limit, where I only talk to either 2 students a day, or even later on in my semester, I started blocking out my open hours twice a week, where those are the times that I see students, and I don't really see them at other periods point in time, because what happens is that you're seeing these students all the time, listening to their stories, feeling and all this stuff, and then it's hard to do your work, right? So you have to be able to balance or integrate both of those things, recognizing that like their stories are important, but your work is also important, and you don't want to have to be taking work home or working over lunch because you spent more time dealing with your students. Has anyone else ever had that experience before? Put that in the comments as well. All right, next level, boundaries with your students. So I just started like finding times that work for you to meet with them, and times that also work for them. And whether that's also like integrating technology, right? So I used to like work really hard to meet all my students in person. And why? look at us, like we are in a conversation right now, like having this amazing chat, and I can't see any of you. So there's definitely finding ways to utilize technology to, one, maximize your time, and then two, have that one-on-one with students in a way that feels maybe even a slight disconnect for you, to allow yourself that space if you're a huge empath, like I am. Next would be putting their stories aside when the work day is done. On a college campus, you never know what you're going to encounter with students. I've had, encounters with students that are homeless, and they come to you and they share their stories, or they don't know where their next meal might come from if they're not on a meal plan, or whatever the case may be. And like for a while that would eat at me, just not knowing how to help, or like what's the next step. And sometimes our institutions aren't always about like caring for the individual student, right? So it feels like if you don't put that extra little in there, if you don't do that extra and like keep that student with you, that you're failing them, right? So finding a way to put them aside. And then most importantly, finding a way to hand it off, like handing it off to deans and college counselors, and yeah, check in, but doing that healthy handoff. And the funny thing is that we always tell our students, so I work with tons of student leaders, right? We tell our students, have boundaries, like it's super important, know how to hand off. And then you go back to yourself and you're not doing the same thing. You know what I'm saying? So just recognize that for yourself. And then finally, maybe the hardest one is boundaries with administrators. Um, I never really had this problem because I'm kind of loud spoken and I always like work really hard to have my voice heard. I think because I've always been really short, so I need to like project. But maybe for some of you, this is a huge issue, is administrators like not knowing like if you're having frustrations, whoop, whoop, if you're having frustrations, like how do you get that across in a way that doesn't offend, or doesn't put your job in jeopardy, things like that. And that can cause a lot of that stress buildup that leads to burnout syndrome, right? Um, so making sure that you are using your active voice and learning how to say no very actively, very strongly and firmly, because no is something that, especially, it seems like there's a lot of, and I'm making an assumption, but it seems like there's a lot of female identified persons on this chat. And, culturally, our voice is meant to like be kept down, to not be amplified, things like that. And so learning how to tell your supervisor, like, hey, the 10 meetings that you have that you never structure, like they're not doing it for me. Like I'm not getting anything out of it, and finding ways to like make it better for yourself. So I had that issue. Like I hate meetings. I think that they never are structured right. Like there's like 1 out of 10 meetings that like actually do something for you, right? And that's a huge like frustration for me and stress. And so I would find a way to like make little outlines that, and like hand them off to my supervisor, like, hey, like these are some things that I've been thinking about personally that like maybe in the next meeting we can address. And so it kind of just like, without offending her or like making her feel like she's not doing her job, I would just like help her to create more structured meetings. And she was very grateful because, like she has her own work to do. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, why should I do other people's work? But sometimes in order to reduce that stress in your own life, you got to do a little extra for the later things. At least that's what I feel. So that really works out for me. And the final thing I want to talk about, just administrators, is being very strong and firm about what you're there to do, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. But earlier when we were talking about reasons for burnout, right? So having a lot of unstructured time, or having things placed on you that aren't in your work description. So a lot of times there's the written and then the unwritten job descriptions, right? So finding a way to be very verbal about what it is that you're there to do and how you can do that better, and your goals and aspirations for later. Like maybe this job is a thing you wanted forever, and maybe it's not. And so telling your supervisor that, like I sit down very frequently with my supervisor, and I say, listen, this is not a job I want forever. Like, it's great, it's a decent title, but I'm trying to live, I'm trying to thrive, so I need to move up in the world, right? And so I'm very clear about that. And when I'm starting to do things that feel very mundane, I let her know, or I let someone know. And I find mentors. Someone once told me that mentors take away 20 years off your lifespan. Sorry, oh, that sounded terrible. Scratch that. 20 years off your career, like your career trajectory, like moves you forward, not your lifespan. You will not die from getting mentors. All right. So with that said, those are the boundaries with your administrators. All right, moving on to competency 2, if no one has any questions of anything I've said so far. So I wanted to start off this competency by asking you guys a poll question. And that's, do you have any established daily wellness practices currently for your workday? So I'm going to take a few minutes. Callie's going to throw that in. Thank you, Callie. Bottom left of the screen, she says. So let's see. Okay, so there's a few votes in, and we have 5, 6. So after you've done your vote, if you want to just throw in what your wellness practices that you do every day in the chat, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to let that roll, and I'm going to keep talking. So wellness practices are very important. And I think, just as we were talking about a few minutes ago, it's really important to first define what it is that you do, not what your work description says, what it is that you do in your job every single day, and why you do it. Like, what is the motivation for what you're doing, and putting that up in a very visible place. Like, I have it written on a huge what are those, like, sticky notes that we all have, like, tons of those big sticky Post-it notes, and I write the reason why I do this work, and I look at it as often as possible. When I start to feel that my connection with why I said that I am doing this work, then I know it's time for me to take a step back and to take a breath and to reevaluate. It's really important to always take time to reevaluate and to reassess while you're doing work, because it can become very stagnant. It can become like just something that you're doing every day, and that's like the sign of disengagement, that sign of burnout. So you want to make sure that you are engaging with yourself and having that constant inner dialogue about how you fit into this work, why you're doing it, and how you can even do it better, and checking in with that self pretty often. The next would be differentiate. Differentiate between the work and who you are as a person. Now, this is a source of frustration for me. I wrote a piece recently about the death of authenticity, and how that really affects, like, friendships, especially in the workplace, or just in general, like how that affects how you interact with people. And I think when you go to, like, a networking event, or when you meet someone new, what's the first thing that they usually say to you? The first thing I usually get is, hey, what's your name? And then the second thing is, what do you do, right? And so I've had to be very smart about realizing that what I do is not who I am. It is a component of who I am, and that can change at any time. Like, it is a growing and changing thing, right? So a title is just a title, and the work that I do is important work, and it does save lives, but it's not who I am, right? So being very cognizant about that. The next tip that I would have about integrating wellness into your workday, and I can see from the chat that we have Jenny who's doing coffee and quiet time at 9 a.m. every morning. That's awesome. You have office stretches, a Fitbit, so all these things, right? So the one I like the most is Jenny's right now, because it has a time frame in it, and that leads to our third thing about scheduling. So it seems not intuitive to schedule your wellness activity, because it feels like that's adding more. Like, why would I add more to my workday when I'm already overbooked, I'm overscheduled, I have so much things, and then you're asking me to put more? Now, I do that because if you don't schedule it, you often don't do it. or you put something over it, right? And something at that time is always going to seem more important. There's always going to be a crisis that's more important, right? Than actually scheduling in that time, scheduling in those like breaks for yourself, those breathing breaks, those mindfulness breaks, that coffee break, walk, right? There's always going to be an email that needs attention right away, or there's going to be a student who, you know, is having a huge crisis that you need to address at that moment. Like, no, like this is my time. This is the schedule. At 2:15 every day, I go for my walk. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be outside. It can be around the building, but that's my time. I put my headphones in, like, don't talk to me. It's not an us time. It's a me time, right? And without that, it's very hard to make it to that 5 p.m. end of the workday situation. Okay. So that's huge. Whatever that means to you, you schedule that in. And I would say have more than one of them that's scheduled in. So for me, I have 2 or 3 scheduled in breaks into my day that I actively try and take every day. It doesn't matter really what I'm doing, I'm going to take that break, because in the long term, it's going to make the quality of your work better, and your ability to interact with your students more fulfilling, and something that you can actually put energy and focus into. So think about that. So think about that. Okay, and then finally, and very important, and I don't think we do enough, is establishing a workspace that is conducive to yourself. We come into these work cultures, right? And they have these established situations. You get a desk or whatever, a cubicle, and then we're told to like follow this, because if you don't, like, you're kind of weird, and like you're doing something different than what other people are doing. That doesn't matter. Like, once you get your work done, like, get your work done and define your space. And that's something I had to learn. Like, I'm not a desk person. Like, desks make me crazy. Like, it hurts my back. I can't like focus. Like, I get the carpal tunnel thing and the neck jut. Like, it's just not cute. Like, it's not for me. So I ended up like making sure that my colleagues, my supervisor, like, people know that, like, if you come into my office, I might be on the floor, like I might be in a couch, I might not be in my office. Once my work gets done, I had to tell my supervisor, because Smith is a very, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Smith at all. It's a women's college. It's very prestigious. It's very A-type. It's like an entire college of A-type people. And like, you have to do things a certain way. And once I got there, I started like changing the culture immediately to fit me, which is a huge thing about finding fulfillment in your work, is like finding a way to have the culture fit you. You shouldn't be having to like fit into a culture. I mean, there's like a distinction, or like places where you have to and where you don't. And so now I may or may not be in my office, and that's okay. You have to be okay with that. I'm getting my work done somewhere on this campus. It might be on the grass. It might be near the pond. It might be in the campus center. I don't know until that moment what I need. And I do that for myself. All right, so making sure you have a work conducive space. Oh, and Jordan will tell you that in my office, there's a huge pink beanbag chair. So I needed that because I work better in my office on the floor than at the desk. I think I've sat at it like once. So that's my little tidbit about that. All right. Breathe. Okay, so next, the third competency. So going back to our list of burnout things, something that has come up very often in my conversations with colleagues and with friends when working on a college campus, is that college campuses can feel kind of old. I don't know, maybe for some of you not, but Nancy lost us. Nancy, can you hear us? Okay, hopefully it's all good. Okay. So the next thing, the competency, sorry, I got distracted. Identifying opportunities for advancement. So that you don't feel stagnant in your work and feeling like you're doing this mundane thing over and over and over, and that you're stuck in this place or stuck in a position and you're not able to grow, right? And maybe your campus or your job is not a place where you're taking fulfillment out of the work you do. Maybe it's not the place that you thought you were going to end up, and you just ended up there, right? So finding ways to find advancement for yourself. And the first way to do that is to keep your resume updated. Like, You should never be beholden to any institution. Like, I do not believe in that. Like, keep your resume updated all the time. Keep track of your responsibilities. So, for example, we were talking about the written and unwritten job description. So I have a very intense spreadsheet of the things that I do every day. And sometimes I can't add to it every day, right? Because I'm busy, you know, I run a department. So I can't add to it every single day. But when I have a chance, I go back and I put in clickety, clickety, click, all the things that I have done that week that may or may not be in my job description. I put the time frames that I do that. And why do I do that? I do that so that when I go to an administrator or a supervisor or something like that and say, this is what I'm doing, this is what my job description says, and or this is what I'm looking to do in the future, I can show how much time I'm spending doing those things. For example, my job doesn't call for any grant writing, but I spend a good portion of my time writing grants and receiving grants, right? That's actually how I ended up being able to bring What's Your Big Lie to my campus by winning a $50,000 grant. So, so that's just like a tidbit. So I keep track of that information, and that helps me be able to traverse my career more quickly than other people, because I can actually show, like, even if they contact my supervisor, like say I apply to a job and they're like, oh, so can you tell us what Chris has done? They can tell you what I've done because I have submitted to them on an annual basis or even sometimes a quarterly basis. These are the things that I'm doing. Like, better know what I'm doing so that you can communicate it with other people, right? So be cognizant about that. The next thing is check the job board regularly. Check the one at your school, check the ones at other schools, like see what people are making or see what people are doing and what are opening up, and get to know people. I say that in the sense that departments are often very closed. And so when you're interacting with those particular people and possibly your stakeholder, your campus stakeholders, right? But you want to open that box for yourself and try and meet as many people as you possibly can, whether that is being a weirdo and trying to sit with someone at lunch during that lunchtime, if it's not your me time lunchtime, or during those weird like welcome back, faculty staff meetings, like trying to meet people, because the more people that you meet and you have even a minor relationship with, the greater your opportunity to move around the campus for different roles and things like that, because they know you. Someone else had once told me that to what was it? Pick. It was the 5-minute rule, or 5-second rule. The 5-second rule. So if someone says like, oh, I need someone to do this. She gave the example of, it was a workshop as well. Raise your hand right now to volunteer, right? And the first person that volunteered, she gave $10 to, right? And so it was the 5-second rule. Like if something comes up, lean into discomfort and try that thing, even if you're not sure that like you may or may not have the skills to do it. Like maybe try it if it's something that might be something that you want to do later, or that you might have interest in later. Like try it, do that 5-second rule. And I struggled about putting that into the PowerPoint because I think we're already so over scheduled and we have so much work to do, or we are one-man show. So it's hard to think about, a 5-second rule or grabbing something new. But I find that when I have done that, it has led to bigger and better things. So for example, at Smith, like the second week I got there, someone came up to me and was like, I want you to run the tobacco-free campus initiative. And I was like, what? I don't know how to do that. I don't even know anyone on campus. Like I just got here, like my stuff isn't unpacked, So, but that ended up leading to meeting the mayor of the town and like all of these really cool people that maybe in the future I can get back into public health on a more governmental or level, because I've met people outside of the Smith campus in that area. So that's just what I mean by leaning into discomfort. Is there any questions about that? Let's see. All right. So finally, we're about like 40 minutes in. So I'm going to go into my last competency. And this one, is very, very important to me. And I think it's something that we're not taught, is how to negotiate for the lifestyle you want. I think that especially as staff members, and like I had talked about earlier, how staff members can be very invisible on campuses. Like, we're not provided the resources. We're expected to put our all and expected to do more work or expected to take work home, things like that. But what we're not expected to have is like a good lifestyle, like to have the lifestyle that we want. And so I think that one of the most important things that you need to do is define what a happy and balanced lifestyle looks like for you individually. Like, what will it take for you in your job and in your life to say, I am happy and I am successful? So I had to take some time to figure out what that meant for me, because, you know, when I was younger, I thought it meant like fancy cars and like being able to like travel all the time, and that hasn't changed. But I had to redefine what that meant for me. So it ended up meaning like travel, control over my time and space so that I can write my blog and go to New York on the weekends, which is where my partner lives, having my meals covered and housing, and being able to integrate movement. I don't like to say physical activity, just like movement into my work day in ways that wouldn't cost me an arm and a leg, and finding ways to maximize my own education. So whether that meant going to existing lectures, or workshops that are on campus that are free, going to the concerts and stuff that are like student based, but like I go to because that's adding value to my lifestyle, and recognizing that you might not get all you want because of institutional structures that may exist, but making sure that you ask for it, like using that active voice to ask. I think that's what I want you to take away from this workshop, is that your voice is more powerful than you think. And we tell students that all the time. For example, I really wanted my meals to be paid for, and I wanted my travel and stuff to be paid for. And people told me, like, you can't ask for that. Like, they're not going to do that for you. They only do that for deans and blah, 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 or res life personnel. And I was like, why not me? Like, and so I made a list of reasons why they should do the things that I wanted to do. I wanted them to pay for my housing too. Like, I was trying to get it all, y'all. And I got most of the things that I wanted. The only thing I didn't get was housing, because they just didn't have the money to pay for my housing. But I asked and I wrote out how it would add value to my life and add value to the campus's life if they paid for my housing and my meals and for traveling and things like that. So you can find ways, and it may take a little bit of extra work to get that value that you want, but once you've defined what it is and how you want to live your life, you can make it happen. So just one more example, like I was working a regular 5-day work week, just like everyone else on campus, right? And that was stressful for me, like being on campus. I also live 30 minutes from school, so that commute was like too much for me. And so I asked, like, can I work a 3-day work week? And they were like, what? A 3-day work week? Nobody does that except for faculty, because faculty are so special, right? And I was like, well, if faculty can do it and they get their work done, like, why can't I do that and still get my work done? And it went back and forth for a while until I was able to negotiate, since I didn't get my housing, for me to have that 3-day work week. So now I get paid my same salary, plus all these added value that I'm adding. So like my salary keeps increasing, right? Not in quantity, but with all of this value that I'm adding to myself. And trust me, y'all, like when you start to see like how your day is like flowing because of how you spoke up for yourself, like trust me, like that will make your day feel better, and it'll start to make your life integrate into your work, so it's not two separate things. And that's my whole spiel. It doesn't have to be separate. It doesn't have to be work and life. It can be that you live your life at work and get your work done. There may be some sacrifices that you have to make, but you have the power to make those changes, and to have your body be the center and your mind be the center, and taking that time for mindfulness. And before I go, I just wanted to plug, not for myself, and I'm not paid by them or anything, but there's an app called Smiling Mind that I I really enjoy. It has like 2-minute, 3-minute, 5-minute, 7-minute meditations that I do in my little 5-minute breaks that I schedule into my day. And essentially, like, you put in your mood, like, I am in a shitty mood right now, or I am feeling really tired, or I'm feeling frustrated or whatever, and they kind of like send you a meditation to do in that moment, and it leads you through it. It's guided and has a great Australian voice. I think that's awesome. And so I use that app. So I just wanted to plug that as well, or just the regular things that you use all the time, like Spotify or Google Voice. Um, oh, the name was the Smiling Mind, Smiling Mind, and it's free. So I like free things. And I also use Google Voice or Spotify or things like that. You don't often think to, instead of just looking up music, like you can look up guided meditations and they have them there, so that you don't have to feel like you have to figure that out all on your own, because that's not, might not be something you're comfortable with. It's definitely not something that I feel like I'm 100% like I can sit down, like meditate by myself. So I like the guided meditations. So I think that's all I really have for you today. And I hope that you've gotten something from this, and that it was helpful. So thank you so much.
All right. Okay, I'm just gonna try and fix all of our screens. Does anybody have any questions? Throw them in the chat. Hang on, I'm trying to sort our whole lives out. It's fine. Oh. Oh, no problem, Sydney. So if there aren't any questions, the one thing that we're going to draw your attention to, of course, as always, join the Facebook Brave Campus group if you're not there already. See, my screen's kind of freaking out, as you can all tell. Right at the bottom of your screen, there's a join our Facebook group, which is in green. So click that button and come on into Brave Campus, where we, of course, will share all of the old webinars if you've missed them. Any resources like Smiling Mind, Christina will be more than happy to toss that in there as well, which is super cool. And you'll get all the updates of what Brave Campus is up to, what Disruptt is up to, and that kind of thing. Next week, we are going to have Blake Fly on, which is super exciting. Jordan's actually mentioned him before. I don't know if you were all here for the first webinar, but the thank you concept. So we're going to be talking about gratitude on campus and how important that is in terms of fostering, open and thankful communities on campus, which is super cool. And then other than that, I don't think we've got anything else for you guys. So make sure you join the group. Any questions, of course. Oh, here we go, finally. Of course, let us know. And just let's give a big thank you to Christina, guys. Thanks so much for coming on, Chris.
Thank you.
All righty. And without further ado, we will see you next week. Same time, same place, guys. Have a great day.